Hello, and welcome to Soul Food Stories, a journey through the culinary history of popular soul food recipes. According to the Cambridge World History of Food, culinary history studies the origin and development of foodstuffs, equipment, the techniques of cookery, the presentation of meals, and the meanings of these activities to the societies that produce them. It makes connections between the sciences, humanities, anthropology, folklore, and the fine arts. My name is Latifa, and I will be your host as we discuss a brief history of soul food and the recipes that make them special, specifically Johnny cakes or hoe cakes. So first, let's start off with what exactly soul food is. Soul food is food that originated from culinary traditions developed from the transatlantic slave trade and U.S. chattel slavery. Soul food is also known as down-home or southern cooking. Soul food transitioned in the 60s and 70s to incorporate diverse comfort foods, but soul food, as a concept, is an evolution of culinary traditions with origins in African American history. The soul food known as unhealthy and some more popular fixations has no authentic relationship with what actually made up the Southern African American diet. They were not all just leftovers and scraps, but a rich tradition that combined the culinary knowledge from the slave trade to the civil rights movement and what some are relearning today. When historians talk about soul food, they focus on three overlapping developmental phases. First, European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade resulted in a combination of food and cooking techniques indigenous to Africa with those indigenous to Europe and the Americas. Think yams and watermelon from Africa, deep frying food in fat, and collard greens from Europe and the Americas. Second, enslaved Africans learned how to use expensive ingredients when cooking for slave owners, things like ham, egg, and refined sugar, while also creating meals for themselves to supplement rations of corn products, wild game, seafood, and other food derived from foraging, hunting, and gardening. And third, the migration of African Americans in the time between the Civil War and World War II dispersed the Southern dietary practices across the United States. So how exactly did food shape the American slave trade? Enslaved Africans were sold to locations because of their expertise with certain crops. For example, the period between 1750 and 1775 was the height of the arrival of Africans from the rice-growing region. People were brought from Senegambia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia to South Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana, where rice plantations centered. The peas and rice dishes created among the diaspora, black-eyed peas and rice, red beans and rice, and jambalaya, are derived from these African rice-growing roots. Some estimates say about 80% of all captives brought to the Americas were brought to regions where sugarcane was the main cash crop. Africans brought from West Africa were growers of rice, millet, maize, cotton, indigo, and tobacco. They were the fishermen, cattlemen, blacksmith, carpenters, potters, and musicians who helped build the colonies. During the Middle Passage, the diets consisted of rice, beans, and yams. Many enslaved Africans continued this diet, but added peppers and incorporated new plants and animals found in their new surroundings. Yams, pumpkin, watermelon, and okra were introduced to the Americas because of the transatlantic slave trade. The use of spices helped develop Creole and Cajun dishes. In fact, the West African spice, grains of paradise, was used as a substitute for black pepper in 14th and 15th century Europe. In the New World, the British Empire introduced produce like cabbage, beets, and turnips, which in turn were added to the enslaved person's diet, as they were known to be eaten by lower-class Europeans. The Chesapeake region brought enslaved fishermen from across West and Central Africa, who had thousands of years of experience to fish for herring, catfish, and crustaceans along the Atlantic and Gulf Coast. In order to survive and cook, language had to develop to accommodate change. The enslaved had to co-create a language and participate in the naming of things like okra, gumbo, and yam. Even the word barbecue has roots in West Africa among the Hausa, who use a similar word to refer to cooking for a long period of time over a fire by grilling or toasting. The hospitality the South is known for was also formulated by enslaved cooks, who had to be available 24 hours to cook meals for plantation owners and any free person that visited. Some of the first celebrity chefs were enslaved Africans. People like Chef Hercules, George Washington's chef, who was formerly trained by a well-known tavern owner, and James Hemmings, Thomas Jefferson's cook at Monticello, was formerly trained in Paris when he traveled there with Jefferson. When we talk about life on a plantation, we can't forget the garden. The garden to the enslaved African homestead was extremely important. All the ingredients for soups and stews were grown in a separate garden. They were the source of nutrients and where medicinal and spiritual practices could be kept alive. For some enslaved people, their gardens were a means to purchase their freedom or the freedom of a loved one, as garden produce was sold and bartered to buy other finery. Before we can discuss Johnny cakes or hoe cakes, we need an understanding of the importance of their star ingredient, corn. Corn was domesticated by indigenous Americans and named maize, after the Taino and Arawak word maize. The slave trade was actually timed to make deliveries in tune with the agricultural cycle of corn, yams, and rice. The most encountered crop on any given plantation was corn. It was given to human and livestock. Every Saturday night, enslaved men would receive 2 pounds of bacon and 1.5 peck of cornmeal to last 2 weeks. Women would get 1/2 pound of meat and 1 peck of meal, and children 1/2 peck each. A peck is 2 dry gallons. Every part of corn was used. The stalks were used for fires and insulation, the silks for medicine for earaches, the seeds for poultry, the husk for cooking utensils, dolls, mattresses, and rugs, and corn cobs for pipes, smoking meat, and even toilet paper. Corn shucking time became a big event in the life of the enslaved. With dancing and food, plantations would band together to shuck crops. These times often served as a courtship occasion and sometimes a competition to find the red ear of corn. Hominy was the most common form of corn eaten. Hominy is maize that has been soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, usually lime water, so that the germ and outer hull are removed. This method was developed by indigenous Americans so that corn was more easily digested. It had the added benefit of converting niacin and vitamin B into absorbable forms. When combined with other foodstuffs such as beans, it was the basis of a fairly balanced diet. In the 17th and 18th centuries, hominy was eaten as the main meal several times a day. When possible, it was seasoned with a bit of preserved or salted pork. Most corn was not consumed in porridges, but as hoe cake, ash cake, or hominy. But as slavery pulled to a close, the industrialization of food emerged, and plain cornmeal and untreated corn was consumed in greater quantities for convenience. Hominy gave way to corn cakes and mush that were empty carbs with little nutritional value. Now that we have an understanding of the history of soul food and the importance of corn, we've come to the star of our program, Johnny cakes or hoe cakes. Indigenous Americans would grind corn into meal called pone, and through socialization and intermarriage, African Americans have used pone in their own recipes. Johnny cakes and hoe cakes are a part of this legacy and are just regional names for cornmeal bread. Johnny cakes and hoe cakes are pancake-like variations of cornmeal bread. They were originally cooked over the blade of a hoe held over an open fire, or on a griddle that in colonial times was also called a hoe. Other cornmeal bread variants include traditional cornbread. The original version was cooked over an open flame and fireplaces, which covered the bread in ash, leading it to sometimes be named ash cake. Southern variations of cornbread include little to no flour, buttermilk, eggs, salt, lard, and some kind of leavening agent. One final popular cornmeal bread recipe is crackling bread. It is cornmeal cooked with bacon-rendered fat with fried pork skins included. It was made during the hog killing season and part of a communal celebration. It is also known as shortening bread. Most know of the folk song Shortening Bread, which was derived from songs sung on plantations with the same name. Crackling bread and all the other recipes mentioned during this presentation are just a small sampling of enslaved Africans' culinary creativity and history. I hope you enjoyed this brief journey into soul food. If you want to know more, all the information provided was found on Gwinnett County Library digital resources. ABC Clio African American Experience is a database that lets you search articles, time periods, and historical figures central to African American history. The Oxford African American Studies Center provides articles, images, maps, and written commentaries from top scholars in the field of African American studies. Also, the books The Cooking Gene, The Jemima Code, and Soul Food, The Surprising Story of American Cuisine One Plate at a Time were used as resources and can be found or placed on hold at any Gwinnett County Library for your reading pleasure. Thank you for watching!